The Korean billionaire stood at the entrance of his own wedding, greeting guests with a practiced smile, when a Rolls-Royce pulled up that no one on the guest list remembered inviting. The woman who stepped out was the ex he had once called Barren, the black woman his family had quietly pushed out of his life years ago. She was not alone. Two small hands gripped hers, and behind her, 100 wedding guests went silent at the same time. Lee Jung-min had spent the morning telling himself this day would feel like victory. He had built an empire out of nothing but discipline and cold decisions, and today he was marrying Celine Huang, a woman his father approved of, a woman who fit the photograph his family had always wanted to hang on the wall. He greeted each guest himself. Handshake, small bow, a warm word about the weather or the flowers. He wanted people to remember that he showed up, that he never hid. He didn't know yet how much that decision would cost him. Joyce Abrams almost didn't come. She sat in the car 3 blocks from the venue for 11 minutes, her hands resting on the small shoulders beside her, listening to her twins argue over which one got to hold the invitation. She had told herself 100 times that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Not to Jung-min, not to his family, not to the guests who used to whisper about her behind perfumed hands, but she was tired of being the woman who disappeared. "Mommy, are we going in now?" her son asked, tugging at his little suit jacket like it itched him. Joyce looked at her daughter, who was already smoothing down her dress with the same serious focus Jung-min used to have before big meetings. Neither child knew what today meant. They only knew they were going to a party, and there would be cake, and Mommy said they could wear their good shoes. She took a breath and told the driver to go. Celine Huang noticed her first, not because of the Rolls-Royce, though that alone made heads turn. She noticed the way the air near the entrance changed, the way conversations stopped mid-sentence, the way her own mother's hand tightened around her arm. Celine had learned early that silence could say more than screaming ever could, and this silence was loud enough to hurt. She saw the woman step out. She saw the twins. She did the math before anyone said a word out loud. Celine didn't call security. She didn't ask her fiancé what was happening. She simply watched, because some part of her, the part that had always sensed Jung-min's heart sitting somewhere just out of her reach, already understood what this meant before her mind caught up. Jung-min turned from the guest he was speaking with and saw Joyce standing at the bottom of the steps. For a few seconds, his whole body forgot what to do. He had built a life on always knowing the next move. Now his mind offered him nothing. Not a greeting. Not a question. Just her face. Older, steadier, more sure of itself than he remembered, and 2 small children standing on either side of her like they belonged there. Guests began whispering behind their programs. "Isn't that the woman from years ago? The one who couldn't... Look how old those kids are. That's 6 years, maybe 7. Joyce heard every word. She kept her spine straight and her face calm, the same face she had trained herself to wear through every meeting where someone doubted her, every room where she had to prove she belonged. She would not let today break what she had spent years building. Her son looked up at the crowd of strangers staring at them. "Mommy, why is everyone looking at us like that?" "Because we're very fashionable," Joyce said quietly, and he giggled, satisfied with that answer, in the way only a 6-year-old can be. Joyce walked forward, past whispering guests, past photographers who hadn't yet realized what they were photographing, until she stood close enough to Jung-min to see the small scar above his eyebrow she used to kiss without thinking. "Congratulations," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "I mean that. I hope you're happy." She turned to leave. That was the plan. Walk in, be seen, prove she wasn't hiding, walk out with her head high. But her daughter had other plans. The little girl reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded paper heart, the kind made from construction paper and glitter glue, the kind 6-year-olds make in school with the careful pride of someone building something important. She had been holding on to it all morning, waiting for the right moment, because her teacher said Father's Day cards were for fathers, and she had heard Mommy say this man's name in her sleep more than once. The card slipped from her small fingers and landed face up on the marble steps. On the front, in crooked purple crayon letters, was a name. A nickname, a private one. The one only his grandmother used to call him when he was small. The one he had told exactly one person in his entire adult life, whispered late at night with his guard completely down. Jung-min stared at the card like it might disappear if he blinked. His certainty, the same certainty that had let him walk away years ago believing he understood every fact of what happened between them, cracked straight down the middle. The younger twin tugged on Joyce's sleeve and looked up, first at his mother, then at the tall stranger standing frozen at the top of the steps, wealth and title meaning absolutely nothing to him in this second. "Mom," he said, loud enough for the closest guest to hear, his voice small but clear. "Is that the man from the bedtime stories?" Jung-min did not answer the boy. He couldn't. His throat had closed around a word he hadn't said out loud in 20 years, a word that belonged to a version of himself that existed before board meetings and quarterly earnings, and a father who taught him that feelings were attacks on ambition. "Yes," Joyce said quietly, kneeling down to scoop the card off the marble steps before anyone else could read it. "That's him, baby. Now let's go find the car." But Jung-min had already stepped forward. "Wait," he said, and the single word carried enough weight that Joyce actually stopped. Behind him, he could hear the low murmur of 200 guests deciding in real time whether they were witnessing a scandal or a miracle. His mother's voice cut through the crowd, sharp and controlled, asking someone to please clear the entrance. Photographers who had been hired to capture his vows were now capturing something else entirely, something that would trend online before the cake was even cut. Celine appeared at his side, her wedding dress bright against the gray marble, and for a moment nobody moved. "Jung-min," she said softly, close enough that only he could hear. "Look at their faces. Really look." He looked. Two identical faces staring up at him, waiting, the way children wait when they don't yet know if they're in trouble or not. The boy had his mother's steady eyes. The girl had a habit of tucking her chin when she felt shy, and Jung-min felt something cold slide down his spine, because he did that exact same thing, had done it since he was small enough to hide behind his grandmother's skirt. "We can't do this today," he said, loud enough now for the front rows to hear him. "I'm sorry. I have to postpone the ceremony." The crowd's murmur turned into something closer to a gasp. His mother's face went pale. Somewhere near the flower arch, his father's jaw tightened into the same disappointed line Jung-min had spent his whole childhood trying to avoid. Celine reached for his hand, not to stop him, but to steady him. "Go," she whispered. "Get your answers before you make another promise you can't keep." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to him all day, and it came from the one person he was supposed to be marrying in 20 minutes. Joyce, meanwhile, was already moving the twins toward the car, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the driver could hear it. Naomi met her halfway across the courtyard, having sprinted from the parking lot the second the whispers reached her phone. "Get in the car," Naomi said. "Now before he says something that sounds nice and means nothing." "Naomi, I watched you rebuild yourself from nothing after that man let you disappear," Naomi said, low and fierce, one hand on the car door. "I am not watching you hand him the pieces back just because he finally noticed you exist." Joyce didn't answer right away. She looked back once, past Naomi's shoulder, and found Jung-min already walking toward her, still in his wedding suit, his tie loosened like it had suddenly become too tight to breathe in. "I'll talk to him," Joyce said quietly, "but not at my house, not anywhere that isn't ours first." She named the equestrian center where the twins trained every weekend, the one place that belonged only to her children. No history, no ghosts, nothing Jung-min could recognize and use to pull her backward into a life she'd already survived leaving. 2 days later, he came alone. No driver waiting at the gate, no assistant trailing him with a phone. Just Jung-min, standing awkwardly at the fence line in clothes too expensive for a stable, watching his son try to stay upright on a pony while his daughter fed carrots to a mare twice her size, without an ounce of fear in her small shoulders. "They're good with animals," he said, when Joyce finally walked over. "They're good with anything that doesn't lie to them," she answered, and he had the decency not to flinch, though it cost him something visible. They stood in silence for a while, The kind of silence that used to feel comfortable between them once, back when silence meant safety instead of everything unsaid. Then his son laughed, high and bright, tucking his chin the exact same way his sister had at the wedding, the exact same way Jung-min had done his entire life, without ever once noticing it in a mirror. Jung-min's breath caught somewhere behind his ribs. He turned away from the fence so Joyce wouldn't see his face crumble, but she saw anyway, because she had memorized every version of him years ago, and grief looked the same on him now as it had the night she left. "I didn't know," he said, so quietly it barely carried. "I swear to you, Joyce, I didn't know they existed." "I believed you chose your family over me," she said. "For 6 years, I believed that. And I believed you hid my own children out of spite," he said. For 6 years. They looked at each other. Two people who had spent half a decade constructing entirely different stories to survive the same silence. And neither of them noticed the missed call blinking on Joyce's phone from a number she hadn't seen in years. It rang again that evening, after Jung-min had gone, after the twins were finally asleep with dirt still under their fingernails from the stables. "Ms. Abrams," said the voice on the other end, careful, almost apologetic. "This is Dr. Orrin Bell. I don't know if you remember me. I treated you after your accident, before everything." Joyce sat down slowly at her kitchen table. "I remember. I saw the coverage," he said. "The wedding, the children." A long pause stretched across the line, heavy with something Joyce couldn't name yet. "I need you to come in. I've been going through old records, and there's something in your file I should have questioned a long time ago." "What kind of something?" Dr. Bell didn't answer right away. When Joyce arrived at his office the next morning, he was already sitting behind his desk with her old chart open in front of him, his glasses pushed up into gray hair, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the pages. He looked up at her with the expression of a man about to hand someone a truth he had been too afraid to carry alone. "This diagnosis," he whispered, sliding the folder toward her, "should never have been final." Joyce's hands went still on the folder. She had read those words in her head 1,000 times over 6 years, had built a whole life around accepting them as fact. Now Dr. Bell was telling her they had never been true at all. "What do you mean it shouldn't have been final?" she asked, though some part of her already knew she wasn't ready for the answer. "After your accident, the internal bleeding damaged tissue, we needed more time to properly evaluate," Dr. Bell said, his voice thin with the kind of guilt that had clearly been sitting in him for years. "Standard protocol called for a second round of testing in 3 months. I never ordered it." "Why not?" He hesitated, and that hesitation told her more than any answer could. "I received a call," he said finally, "from someone at Lee Industries. They said further testing wasn't necessary. They said the family had already made its own decision about your relationship with their son, and prolonging your hope would only cause more damage in the long run." Joyce felt the room tilt slightly, though nothing had physically moved. "You let a stranger decide my body's future because it was convenient for a company. I let fear decide," he said quietly. "Fear of losing my hospital's funding. Fear of being the doctor who defied a family with that much influence. I told myself I was protecting you from false hope. I have spent 6 years telling myself that lie." Joyce stood and walked to the window, needing distance from the folder, from his face, from the version of herself that had cried alone in a hospital room, believing her body had failed her completely. Across the city, in a boardroom that still smelled faintly of the wedding flowers no one had bothered to remove, Jung-min sat across from his father for the first time, as an equal instead of an heir. "I need the truth," Jung-min said. "All of it." Chairman Lee folded his hands the way he always did before delivering difficult news, a gesture Jung-min recognized because he had unknowingly inherited it. Some truths only cause damage when they're dragged into daylight. "2 children exist because of decisions made without my knowledge," Jung-min said. "Don't tell me what damage looks like." His father was quiet for a long moment. Then he admitted, carefully, that someone in the family office had spoken with Joyce's doctor after the accident. He framed it as guidance. He called it protection. He did not call it what it actually was. "You told them to make sure she never got answers," Jung-min said, his voice flat with disbelief. You let me believe I loved a woman who simply couldn't give me a family. And you let her believe her own body betrayed her. And both of those were lies you built. I built a version of events that let you inherit this company without distraction, Chairman Lee said. I am not proud of it, but I would make the same choice again if it meant protecting this family's future. Jung-min stood so fast, his chair scraped hard against the floor. Before we go further into what this family really cost two innocent people, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, because what happens next changes everything Jung-min thought he understood about his own father. At that exact moment, across town, Joyce was sitting back down across from Dr. Bell, her composure cracking as he pulled a second file from beneath the first. There's more, he said gently. The embryos you and Jung-min created during treatment, before the accident, they remained in storage, legally preserved under both your names. Joyce's breath caught. I know. I used them, years later, on my own, after I'd rebuilt everything. You never told him, Dr. Bell said. It wasn't an accusation. It was almost a confession of his own guilt, understanding now how deep the silence had run on both sides. He'd already accepted a life without me, Joyce said, her voice breaking despite every effort to hold it together. I wasn't going to beg a man who chose his family's comfort over mine. I decided I'd rather raise them alone than raise them waiting for someone who never called. He didn't know you'd used them, Dr. Bell said carefully. Joyce, I don't think he knew any of this was possible. The realization landed on her slowly, the way truth often does when it dismantles something you built your whole identity around. She hadn't survived alone because he abandoned her. She had survived alone because two frightened, powerful people had decided her pain was an acceptable cost for protecting someone else's future. Across town, former employees of the Lee family office were already being quietly interviewed by a journalist Naomi had contacted without telling Joyce, each one confirming pieces of the same story. Pressure applied to a hospital board, a payment disguised as a research grant, a directive passed down not as an order but as a suggestion, everyone understood not to question. Jung-min arrived at Joyce's door that evening unannounced, his tie gone, his composure gone with it. I confronted him, he said before she could speak. He admitted part of it, only part, enough to make himself sound careful instead of cruel. Joyce stepped aside and let him in, no longer certain who deserved her anger and who deserved her grief. They sat across from each other in her kitchen, the same kitchen where her children did their homework and argued over cartoons, and for the first time neither of them reached for blame. I built my whole life on believing you let me go easily, Joyce said. That, you simply decided I wasn't worth the fight. I built mine on believing you punished me, by hiding what should have been ours, Jung-min said. We were both wrong. We were both lied to by people who were supposed to protect us. Jung-min's phone buzzed once, then again, until he finally silenced it and looked up at her with the exhausted honesty of a man who had nothing left to defend. My father sat across from me today, he said quietly, and told me exactly what he thought our love was worth. He didn't finish there. He pulled up the voice memo he had secretly recorded during the confrontation, the one piece of proof he hadn't been able to bring himself to delete, and pressed play. His father's voice filled the small kitchen, steady and unapologetic. I believed losing one woman was a smaller price than losing the future of our family. The recording kept playing in the small kitchen, his father's voice steady and unashamed, and Joyce watched something in Jung-min finally break loose from wherever he'd kept it locked for 6 years. He's not sorry, Joyce said quietly, once the memo ended. He's just sorry he got caught. I know, Jung-min said. I've known my whole life how he thinks. I just never imagined I'd be the price he decided was worth paying. He set the phone down on her table, like it was something contagious. The next morning, Jung-min walked into Lee Industries for what would be the last time as its heir. He didn't call a meeting. He didn't ask for a severance package or a graceful exit story crafted by the communications team. He stood in front of the board that had spent his whole life grooming him, and told them plainly that a company built partly on silencing a woman's medical truth wasn't one he could keep leading with a clear conscience. You're walking away from everything, one board member said, stunned. For what? A scandal that will pass in a news cycle? For two children who deserve a father who didn't inherit his silence along with his company, Jung-min said, and left before anyone could talk him out of it. By noon, the story was everywhere. Reporters camped outside Joyce's building within hours, shouting questions about hidden children, secret embryos, a billionaire's collapsed wedding. Some headlines painted Jung-min as a victim of his family's cruelty. Most painted him as a man who abandoned a black woman and only returned once his reputation demanded it. He didn't defend himself online. He didn't hire anyone to manage the narrative. He simply let the criticism land, because some small, stubborn part of him believed he deserved at least a portion of it. Joyce felt her phone buzz with an offer from the Lee family's legal team, a generous settlement meant to make the story disappear quietly, the kind of number most people wouldn't have hesitated over. She stared at it for a long moment before calling the lawyer back. "I don't want your money," she said. "I want the hospital records corrected publicly. I want the doctor protected from retaliation for telling the truth. And I want an apology that isn't hidden behind a non-disclosure agreement. Ms. Abrams, this offer is substantial. So was what your family took from me," she said, and hung up. That evening, Naomi showed up at Joyce's door with an expression Joyce hadn't seen on her best friend in years, something close to shame. "I need to tell you something," Naomi said, sitting down before her legs could change her mind. 6 years ago, Jung-min wrote you letters, 3 of them. He asked me to make sure you got them, back when I still had your old address. Joyce went very still. "What letters?" "I never gave them to you," Naomi admitted. "I read the first one." He sounded lost and confused, still deciding between you and his family. "And I decided you deserved better than a man who needed convincing. I thought I was protecting you." "You made that choice for me," Joyce said, her voice trembling somewhere between anger and heartbreak, "just like his family made choices for both of us." "I know," Naomi whispered. "I've hated myself for it ever since I saw those twins get out of that car." Joyce didn't respond right away. She thought about all the nights she'd told herself Jung-min had simply let her go, never once fighting to stay, and now that story too was cracking apart under the weight of other people's decisions made in the name of love. Meanwhile, outside her building, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, drawn by a tip that Jung-min was visiting again. When his car pulled up, questions flew before he'd even closed the door behind him. "Did you know about the children? Is it true? Your father paid off a doctor?" How does it feel abandoning a woman because people said she was barren? Joyce came outside before he reached the entrance, stepping between him and the cameras with a calm that surprised even her. "He is not the villain in this story," she said, loud enough for every microphone to catch it clearly. "He was lied to. I was lied to. If you want a villain, look at the people who decided our lives were smaller than their comfort." The reporters fell quiet for a moment, unsure what to do with a woman refusing the easy narrative they'd already written in their heads. Inside, once the door was closed and the noise faded into something almost bearable, the twins sat on the living room floor, watching the adults around them with the confused seriousness only children carry. "Why does everybody keep crying?" the little girl asked, looking between her mother and the man she was slowly learning to call something more than a stranger. Neither adult had an answer that wouldn't require explaining things far too heavy for 6-year-olds to hold. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Jung-min sat on the porch steps outside Joyce's house, instead of leaving, unwilling to walk away again even though every instinct told him he had no right to stay. Joyce sat down beside him, the silence between them different now, less like a wall and more like something they were slowly learning to hold together instead of apart. "I resigned today," he said, "officially. No company, no title, no father pretending he did the right thing. That's a lot to lose in 1 week. It's less than what I already lost," he said quietly. 6 years with them. I can't get that back no matter what I sacrifice now. Joyce didn't offer forgiveness. She wasn't ready, and she refused to pretend otherwise just to make the moment easier for either of them. But she didn't move away either, and for two people who had spent years defining themselves by distance, that alone felt like something enormous, shifting quietly into place. The bedroom door creaked open behind them, Their son stood in the doorway in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, having clearly been listening longer than either adult realized. "If Dad comes home?" he asked softly, looking between the two people who had built his entire world without either of them fully understanding how. "Does that mean somebody has to leave again?" Jung-min knelt down so he was eye level with his son, the way he'd learned to do over the past months, instead of speaking down at children like they were shareholders needing convincing. "No one has to leave," he said. "Not this time. I promise you that." The boy studied his father's face the way 6-year-olds do, checking for the small cracks that give adults away when they're lying. He didn't find any. He nodded once, satisfied enough to let sleep pull him back toward his room, and Joyce watched Jung-min exhale like he'd just passed the most important test of his life. Months passed the way real healing does, slowly, without music swelling in the background. Jung-min turned down the board's offer to reinstate him as CEO, even after his father's resignation left the position open. Instead, he used what remained of his name and his money to build something smaller and harder to walk away from. A foundation dedicated to protecting fertility patients from exactly the kind of quiet influence that had stolen 6 years from his own family. Dr. Bell joined him as medical director, no longer a man haunted by silence, but one finally using his voice for something that mattered. Chairman Lee stood before a courtroom, not a boardroom, and admitted everything this time, all of it, without the careful editing that had protected him his whole life. He lost his title, his reputation, and most of the influence he'd spent decades building. He gained, unexpectedly, quiet visits from grandchildren, who were slowly learning to trust him in small, cautious steps. Celine left the city that spring to run the charitable foundation she'd always dreamed about before duty and family expectation rerouted her life toward a wedding that was never truly hers to begin with. She sent Joyce a short message before she left. "Thank you for not humiliating him when you had every right to. He deserves the family he almost lost." Joyce kept the message. She didn't need it, but she kept it anyway. The twins' school held its family celebration on a warm afternoon in early June. The kind of ordinary day that means nothing to most people, and everything to the ones who almost didn't get to have it. Jung-min sat in the third row of folding chairs, no assistant beside him, no car waiting outside with its engine running, just a father in a slightly wrinkled shirt, clapping too loudly when his daughter forgot half her lines, and improvised the rest with total confidence, laughing without meaning to when his son tripped over his own feet, walking off the small stage. Joyce watched him from 2 seats over, not the polished billionaire who once froze at the sight of a Rolls-Royce, but a man learning patience, one missed line and one scraped knee at a time. After the performance, while the twins ran off with their classmates toward a table of cookies shaped like stars, Jung-min turned to her, his hands unsteady in a way she hadn't seen since the day outside the equestrian center. "I'm not going to give you a speech," he said. "I used to think grand gestures meant something. I know now they were just easier than showing up every single day." Joyce waited, saying nothing, letting him find his own way through it. "I can't earn back 6 years," he said. "I know that. I'm not asking to erase what happened, or what your family survived without me. I'm just asking if you'll let me spend the rest of my life earning the years I have left." He didn't kneel. He didn't produce a ring. He simply stood there, stripped of every advantage he'd ever used to get what he wanted, offering her nothing but consistency and time. Joyce didn't answer right away. She looked past him to where the twins were arguing over the last star-shaped cookie, and she called them over. "What do you two think?" she asked, crouching down between them. "Should we let him try?" Her daughter looked at Jung-min for a long, serious moment, then reached for his hand. Her brother did the same on the other side, and together they guided his hand toward their mother's, small fingers placing something neither of them fully understood, but somehow already trusted completely. Joyce looked down at her hand resting in his, then up at the man who had once stood frozen at the top of a staircase, while wealth and title meant nothing beside 2 children he never knew existed. "Yes," she said quietly. No crowd this time, no whispers, no cameras waiting to catch her reaction. Just a small, steady word offered freely instead of taken by force. They walked to the car together that evening, the twins racing ahead arguing over who would open the door first, and for the first time, neither Joyce nor Jung-min flinched at the sight of a car waiting outside a building for them. Somewhere across the city, Dr. Bell's phone lit up with a message from a woman he didn't yet know, a former patient, asking careful questions about a diagnosis that had never quite made sense to her either. He read it twice, then set the phone down and looked at the framed photo Jung-min's foundation had sent him that week, 4 smiling faces standing together in the summer light. He picked the phone back up and began to type his reply. Some stories end where the pain stopped. Theirs ended where the healing finally had room to grow.